Terms. One of the things you'll find out about hacking is that there's a whole different bunch of terms, a whole glossary full of terms that you'll be chasing around for the rest of your career here. Some of the terms, however, that you'll need to know, at least as a foundation, as a certified ethical hacker, are the various types of hackers. What's a black hat? What's a white hat? What's a cracker? What's a hacker? And so forth. Some of those I discussed a little bit in our last nugget, but we'll discuss some of those and some new ones here as well. We'll also talk about the different kinds of security weaknesses in terms and what they mean. What does O-day mean or zero-day mean, for example? What really is a vulnerability or an exploit? We'll also take a look at external threats, and from the perspective of a certified ethical hacker, what role do you play when you're trying to attack a company, again, of course, with its permission? What role do you play when you're making an external attack? Or what role would you play when you're performing an internal attack on a network as well? Did you ever have a nickname or some kind of a moniker that all your friends or other people that you knew used to call you by? I remember when I was in high school, I drove a little too fast. I shouldn't have done that. But my friends called me AJ, as in AJ Foyt back in those days. I have a big friend of mine. He's got to be close to 300 pounds, and he's in the military, big, tough Sergeant Rock-looking guy. So sometimes I'll just call him Sergeant Rock, or sarcastically, I'll just call him Tiny. Or like the nickname I used to have back in college. Of course, back then I was just always known as that creepy guy, quote unquote. In any case, we have terms also for different kinds of people that perform different kinds of roles in the hacking world. And although there are more terms than just the ones I'm going to show you here, we'll go over some of the major ones that at least we should be familiar with. Also, by the way, you don't have to try to memorize my exact words here because I'm going to have a glossary up on www.nuggetlab.com. That's NUGGETLAB.com. And up on nuggetlab.com, you'll also be able to get any other supporting documentation or files that I might refer you to throughout this series. So again, all these terms will be in the glossary that I put up there for you. One of the first terms, of course, is going to be kind of obvious, hacker. You probably already know mostly what a hacker is just because by virtue of the fact that you purchased this video. A hacker is a person who modifies something to perform in a way that differs from its original design or intent. And as I mentioned in our last nugget, that doesn't always refer just to computer issues, but that's typically how we think of it this day. So that's kind of a review term there. There's also a cracker. You see, a hacker does not really have, the definition by itself does not really have a moral definition one way or the other, for good or for evil. However, a cracker is definitely someone who's typically viewed as someone who hacks into a computer for offensive purposes. So they might be trying to steal information or deface your website or something like that. This would be a person you would not want, certainly, hacking into your network. A cracker is still a hacker. It's just a kind of hacker. It's the evil side of the hacking world there, if you will. There's also the ethical hacker, and of course, hopefully, we're the good guys. We're the ones that will only hack into systems for defensive purposes, and that would be the definition. A security professional who uses hacking skills for defensive purposes. And again, we talked about that a little bit in our last nugget. Now let's go ahead and talk about some other terms that are kind of related to these previous terms that we've already discussed. One of those would be white hat, and some of these are kind of fairly synonymous. An ethical hacker should always be a white hat hacker. And this is a hacker with defensive security intentions. This might be a security analyst, for example, that again, somebody hires to come into their company to hack into things. Now, a white hat hacker, that's what that would be, a white hat hacker, existed before ethical hackers. Ethical hackers is a relatively new term and for a relatively new certification. In the past, we just used to be referred to as colloquially white hat hackers. And then, of course, there's the black hat hackers, and you can kind of guess what the difference there is. This would be a hacker with malicious or destructive intentions. That would be somewhat synonymous with a cracker. And then finally we have the gray hat hacker. Now, as you can kind of imagine, the gray hat hacker is a combination between a white hat and a black hat. And we typically say that a gray hat is a person who alternates roles as a white hat or black hat hacker. Sometimes we say that they are a white hat by day and a black hat by night. And this is just my honest opinion. I could be wrong about this, but I really think this is the way it is. I really think that most white hat or ethical hackers are really gray hat hackers. And the reason why I say that is because in order for us to be able to perform an ethical hack against a corporation that we have permission to hack against, we have to be able to use tools that are out there in the wild that black hat hackers use. Well, I don't want to just show up at the doorstep of a corporation that I have a contract to hack against and say, hey, I'm going to hack against your company, but I'm going to use a tool I've never used before. Well, you see, I want to be able to have some experience with that tool, and really, some of the only ways to get that experience are to perform as safe a hack as you can, anyway, against targets that you didn't necessarily have permission for. Now, here's my legal disclaimer with that. Neither I nor CBT Nuggets is telling you to hack illegitimately or to hack illegally. I'm just saying that I think that most hackers have the perspective that they have to do some black hat hacking in order to get the depth of experience they need in order to perform ethical or white hat hacks. Let's also take a look at a couple of other terms here, a few other terms. One of those would be a script kiddie, which is a highly insulting term. This is somebody who uses hackers' tools indiscriminately or unskillfully, and they never really come up with anything original. They just take a bunch of tools and they keep launching them against a target because they don't really know what else to do. Well, that would be a script kiddie. They don't really have any originality. They don't really have the ability or haven't really put the effort into thinking around certain obstacles. They just download other people's stuff and they keep launching it against the targets. Now, to some degree, all hackers are going to use pre-existing tools, such as Nmap or Nessus or Metasploit or certain other tools that we'll be discussing as we go here. So we all use those tools. The difference between a hacker, though, a good hacker, and a script kiddie is that a script kiddie does not have the ability to really make intelligent determinations, such as reading false positives. When you do scanning, for example, you might get positive results back, but they're really false positives. How do you determine what a false positive is? Or you might also see that it looks like you have a target that's pretty vulnerable against your target company here, but it might just be a honeypot. We'll talk more about honeypots later on, but they're really fake computers, so to speak, or virtual computers that are designed to look like legitimate targets, but that waste the hacker's time and allow the target company to analyze what kind of actions the hacker is performing. Well, somebody who has less experience won't be able to tell that they've just been led into a trap and that they're just wasting their time. A script kiddie might be somebody like that, although some of the really good honeypots are very, very difficult for anyone to differentiate. In any case, the script kiddie pretty much means you're just an amateur, and again, it's very insulting. In fact, if you call someone a script kiddie, you better be willing to back it up. I have an acquaintance that I know who's probably one of the best hackers out there, and he was chatting online with somebody one day, and this person that he was chatting with kept making these grandiose claims that they could control the internet or something like that. So this hacker friend of mine said, "Oh, come on, everybody knows you're just a script kiddie." The script kiddie then chatted back and said, "Oh yeah, watch this. I'm going to take down your internet connection for 20 minutes. And then in the next few seconds, his internet connection went down, and he was silent to the internet for the next 20 minutes. And when he came back up, the guy kind of had to eat crow and apologize for calling this guy a script kiddie. And I would too, because if you don't, you never know when you're going to get hit again by this hacker. Apparently, somehow this other hacker, this guy that he had thought was a script kiddie, was able to hack into the ISP's routing iOS or something like that and make modifications so that he pretty much had root-level control over the network equipment at the ISP. Another term would be a hacktivist, who performs hacktivism. Hacktivist is really kind of a combination of two words, a hacker and an activist. It's someone who hacks with an agenda or for a cause. They might hack against certain sites that maybe they're environmentalists, and they hack against companies that they think are anti-environmental, or they hack against some website that is representative of the opposing political party, or something like that, something that they would stand against if they want to teach somebody a lesson or something. And typically what they'll do, hacktivists will do, is go in and deface a website to try to make a point. That's not all they do, but that could be one example of it. Also, let's talk about what a vulnerability is. Now, the term is probably somewhat self-evident, but there is a minor difference between vulnerabilities and exploits and some other terms. But vulnerability is simply a weakness that could lead to compromised security. It might not necessarily be tested, but somebody might be going through code of a certain application or an operating system, and they might, as they go through it, they might say, hey, there's room in here to exploit the printing service in such a way that someone could take system control or root level control over this computer. They haven't figured out a way to do it yet, haven't written any code to do it or any script to do it, but it looks like there's a hole there that would allow that to happen. And once that is determined, then what somebody else might do, once they realize that there is a vulnerability there, is they might say, hey, there is a vulnerability there. I'm going to go ahead and write some code, write a utility, write a script, or something, or a virus, or something like that, that could exploit that vulnerability. So then an exploit is a defined method of hacking that vulnerability, or it's a proof of concept. And then let's go on. You know, I just thought of something. The hacktivism, as I go back up to hacktivism here, let me just point you to a website that just occurred to me. I think I can remember this one right. The hacktivist.com, if I remember it right. The hacktivist.com. By the way, here's a quick tip for you. By typing in that part of it and then holding down Control-Enter, it automatically fills in the rest, the HTTP, the www, and the .com over here. So in any case, this is pretty much clearinghouse central for anything related to hacktivism. A lot of really good information about hacktivism on this website. If you want to learn more about it, here you go. Then finally, there is O-Day, or as some people call it, 0 day. Now, this is not O-D-A-Y. This is actually a 0, but colloquially we can call it O-Day or 0 day. Most hackers I know just call it O-Day. In any case, well, what is it? This is an unreported exploit. Remember, we have a vulnerability, which is a weakness in a program or a system of some kind. Then we have the actual exploit. Well, the person who comes up with that exploit first has come up with O-Day. They're the originator of an exploit against a vulnerability. Now, O-Day typically requires some programming or scripting knowledge. There can be some O-Day that comes up where someone is just able to click through an unexpected routine of things or run an unexpected series of command line commands or something like that. But most O-Day, it typically comes out in some kind of a code form. And it might even be a virus or a spyware or malware piece. And O-Day, by the way, is it is the really coveted item of hackers. Everybody wants to come up with O-Day for a number of reasons. Number one, the bragging rights are huge. People really like to come up with that. And hackers are pretty proud people, and we really like to talk about what we've been able to exploit and things like that. It's quite a lot of affirmation in that. So in any case, that's one reason why it's highly coveted. Another reason why is because it can be worth big bucks. Now, I've never tried to sell O-Day before, so I can't tell you exactly how you would do it. However, if you come up with an exploit and it hasn't been reported yet, and you're the one that reports it to a vendor, you can give them enough information or give them some screenshots of how it works or showing that it has worked, and then you can attempt to sell them the script or the code that you've come up with for this O-Day exploit. I don't necessarily recommend that you do that to the vendor themselves, because they might just as soon turn around and sue you. They might be able to say that you illegally decompiled their code somehow, and if you look at licensing agreement for a lot of software, then it says you're not allowed to modify that code in any way. Well, you might say, well, I never actually bought the software, so I never actually agreed to the license. Well, in that case, you stole it, right? Well, that's good for, I think it's $10,000 per illegitimate copy that you might have to pay. So there's all kinds of legal entanglements you can get into that when it comes to reporting the O-Day, and that's another reason also why a lot of hackers remain anonymous. And we just have a tendency to hide behind some kind of a screen name or hacker alias. Now, one place where somebody might have a little bit more luck in selling O-Day would be to a security consulting company or to a manufacturer of security-type devices. This might be a firewall manufacturer or someone who creates intrusion detection systems or intrusion prevention systems, which is IDS or IPS, which the difference between the two is getting slimmer and slimmer all the time. In any case, we'll talk more about those as we go as well. But these would be something you would sell to maybe a security company. Might also be an antivirus company or an anti-spyware company, because a lot of times O-Day could be very similar to, or can exactly be, some kind of a virus or some kind of a script that could look like a virus or some kind of malware or something like that. Now remember, ethical hackers are really just duplicating what black hat hackers do. So in order to do that, we're going to duplicate it from two different perspectives. One, we can pretend to be or try to be an external threat to duplicate crackers from, for example, ward driving. Ward drivers are people that take some kind of a portable device. It could be a wireless access point detector of some kind, or it could be a laptop, or an iPad, or a Palm device, or something that has wireless capability, and you just drive downtown and you go by certain buildings to see if you're getting a wireless signal from a wireless access point. And once you pick up that signal, you can do a number of different things. You can try to see how it's secured and see if there are any exploits against that particular wireless access point. You could also just do something almost harmless. Maybe you're just going to be able to use that access point for free internet service. It's a lot better than paying, $39.95 a month down at the Starbucks. So we can just do that kind of thing to freeload internet access. Or you could be more malicious and try to use that access point to worm your way into the rest of the network. And that particularly is going to be the case if it's unsecured wireless access point. This sometimes happens when employees set up rogue wireless access points. That means that, maybe a group of people goes into the office and they keep getting tired of plugging their laptops into an RJ45 jack out of the wall on a drop cable. Well, since they're so tired of doing that, they just want to say, hey, my laptop has wireless network card in it. Why don't we just set up our own wireless access point, and then all the people that come into this office, if they want to, they can just use wireless instead. Well, if they didn't run that by IT and properly secure it, then it's just going to probably be an open wireless access point with default security settings, which are very easy to figure out for hackers. So that might be one of the objectives of a war driver, is to look for rogue or open wireless access points. We'll talk a lot more about this whole topic when we talk about wireless issues later on in this series. Or you might just be able to access that company through the internet. Now, this could be easier than it sounds or harder than it sounds. A lot of corporations don't actually host their own internet web servers. They might just have their internet web servers hosted at a colo, which is also known as a co-location facility. This is usually a company that has backbone access or pretty high-speed access to the internet. And as such, they can provide internet access for a number of different companies. They might have 20, 30 more companies within a small building that does nothing more than host web servers. It's your job to host the web servers, but they're trying to host the web servers. In any case, that does provide some limited exposure. For example, if you hack into that website, yeah, maybe you can deface their website or something like that if you're a hacktivist. But what if you're actually trying to gain access to that corporation's internal servers? Well, if that's the case, initially, you don't really have that much access, since all you really did was hack the web server at the colo. It's not really directly attached to that company's internal network, which could be miles or even states away. However, a lot of the times, there will be some kind of a back-channel method for administering those web servers. How does the company update the web content when they have a new product or a press release, or they just want to give a new look to their website? Well, they typically are going to be able to do that from their own office, and they can do that through Telnet or FTP or some method like that. Well, there's a number of vulnerabilities in that. You could sniff the FTP traffic and figure out what the password is for the person who's getting into those web servers to administer them. Or Telnet, again, is also another pretty big vulnerability in many cases. And again, we'll discuss that more when we actually get into some active hacks here. Well, what else could you do? Once you figure out, for example, the Telnet password that's being used, which is passed in the clear, or the FTP password that's being used, which is also typically passed in the clear, then what you could do then is take that password and see if it works against any of the servers that are in their DMZ, or if it works against their firewall, for example. So a lot of administrators, if we get kind of lazy, we have a tendency to use the same passwords on a number of different fronts. So the same password that's used for our web servers is also used for our iOS on our routers, or it might also be used in our IDS servers, our mail servers, and so on. So if I can figure out one password, maybe that's the same password to worm my way into the rest of your network so that hopefully I can get access or get root. We also have black box attacks, and that just reminds me that I didn't put that in the glossary, but I'll put that in the glossary for you as well. This would simply be security testing with no knowledge of the network infrastructure. And that would certainly be the case if you were attacking it from the internet, for example. You just decided to pick out a company and decided to attack against it. Well, you would be performing a black box attack, which also brings up a couple of other terms that I'll put in the glossary for you as well. That would be the white box test. That would be security testing with complete knowledge of the network infrastructure. This might be from the knowledge of someone who is a network admin, who has that level of knowledge of how the network is laid out and so forth. Or you might be testing from a gray box perspective. And by the way, whether you test from black, white, or gray box will also usually be defined in the terms that you contract for with the company when you perform an ethical hack. So in any case, also a gray box would be internal testing from the perspective of internal users in the network. This might just be Joe user, not an administrator or a high-level administrator of anything like that. Just a generic user's box. Well, that would be a gray box test. Let's talk about some of those gray box tests and some of those internal threats. First of all, you might just have ignorant employees who don't know any better. Every time they download something from the internet, they open it. Anytime someone sends them an email attachment, and even if it's in spam, they just open it. Well, this can, of course, be a huge problem because they're probably going to open their system up to all kinds of malware, spyware, all kinds of viruses, worms, trojans, and the like. So when you're performing the ethical hack, you can just go in there just the same way an ignorant employee would who wouldn't understand the danger of those viruses and things potentially. And you can see, you set up an email account and start getting on some mailing lists and start allowing yourself to be sent, dozens or hundreds of spams every day and see if there's any kind of viruses in them. And what you're going to do at that point is to check that company's spam restriction software, their spam product, or their antivirus software and see if it has any holes or if it's allowing anything through. So that's one way we would do that from an internal type of a threat. Now, what can be equally dangerous, even more dangerous, depending on how much access or knowledge they have, would be a disgruntled employee. Maybe you got passed over for promotion, or maybe the boss isn't treating you right, or you have some other reason why you're unhappy with your company. You didn't get the parking space that you wanted. You didn't get invited to the company Christmas party. Someone keeps stealing your stapler. Who knows? In any case, you're disgruntled. What can you do? Well, you can take a look at that perspective as well, and if the company suspects that they have admins who possibly have left the company in a huff, maybe before they left, they left some kind of a backdoor in the computer systems, and a backdoor would be a way of gaining access to the computer easily at some point in the future, even if your original access was removed. They might create an account with administrator access and name it a name that looks, innocuous or something like that. And therefore, at a later time, they might be able to dial in through remote access services or RAS and gain access to that account and dial into the server. So that's what we would want to see if there are holes left open for disgruntled employees to be able to access. Now, employees have to be given access. There are certain employees that are going to have access to the database. And if they wanted to do something malicious, they could take another salesperson's sales data, for example, and totally skew the numbers and screw up orders for customers or something like that. And you might not have any control over that. That's going to have to do with more of a human factor. But you can see that disgruntled employees could certainly be an issue there, especially with admins or reckless admins. And these are the admins that use the same password for every level of access that they have. They use the same password on the router as they do on the mail server, as they do on the web server, as they do on their own computer. Or these are admins who log on with their domain admin privileges or with root privileges all the time. And that's typically not a good security practice. Typically, admins should log on with just generic user credentials that do not have any special administrator privileges. And then if they need to perform an administrative task, under Windows at least, they can use the run as command to run under different credentials that have a higher level of access. But that certainly is one thing we want to check out, is any reckless admins that might be around. Another example of a reckless admin or a careless or lazy admin is somebody who does not apply patches that are readily available to plug security holes, but they just don't do it. Sometimes administrators, we often get busy, especially in smaller to medium-sized companies, where they're having to wear many hats. They're the help desk guy, and they're the guy that's trying to configure the mail server. So they're doing a lot of different things, and they don't have as much focus as some admins where they'll have one specialized area where that's all they focus on. Or it might be a larger corporation, but it might be an admin in a smaller branch office who, again, has to wear all the hats. Well, in that case, it's a lot of times easy to let things slip through the cracks. And that's what we as ethical hackers are going to do, is to see if we can use an exploit that came out, 2 months ago, and see if we can use that exploit against any of their systems. And if the patch for it came out 1 month ago, then we know that they're at least a month behind if we're successful with that hack. Now, a lot of times, especially with government organizations, I know of a large defense contractor for the United States military with over 100,000 desktops, and they still have not upgraded to the latest Windows 2000 Service Pack. And yes, they are still on Windows 2000 instead of Windows XP for their desktops. And the reason for that is they say that it has not yet been properly, quote, regression tested. A lot of government organizations especially like to take some kind of a patch or a service pack, and they will test it, and they will test it, and they will test it for weeks or months on end. Then they'll have verbose reports saying what the advantages or disadvantages are of using this particular service pack, and then finally, hopefully, they'll release it. Well, the disadvantage here is that this company also uses an imaging package where that if somebody were to download on their own, for example, maybe they took their laptop home and they went to Windows Update website and they said, oh, hey, I've got Service Pack 2, but on Windows website, Update website, it says that Service Pack 3 is available. So I'm going to go ahead and download that and install Service Pack 3 on my laptop. Well, when they come back into the office and reconnect, their network management software will detect that that person has illegitimately, so to speak, upgraded to Service Pack 3, and then it will send down an enforceable image to their laptop and say, hey, you're not supposed to have Service Pack 3. I'm going to throw back down Windows 2000 Professional with Service Pack 2. So even when the company employees try to do the right thing, the corporation as a whole slaps them down and they go back to a less secure state. And sometimes you just have that almost as an unavoidable thing. I know the administrators at this corporation I'm talking about, they're mad. They know that they need to have this service pack. And every time, by the way, that they don't get this service pack up to Service Pack 3, they find out that they wind up with Blaster on their network. Because they have another problem where, for some reason in the imaging, the image of those Windows 2000 Professional machines has an outdated virus definition file. So you see it just goes around and around and around. And before they can get the virus definition update file, then it gets infected with Blaster. Then you can see where this goes. It's just a really big mess. And that often is the case with large corporations. We have a tendency to think that if it's a large corporation, hey, they must really know a lot about security. They probably paid a lot of people a lot of money to figure out their security and really lock this place down. Not necessarily. Those large corporations can move very, very slowly on some very important issues at times. And that's often true also of government organizations, especially state and local governments, because they will often run their IT department based upon policies that were written in the mid-'80s, when none of this stuff was as much of an issue as it is now. And there's also an issue of corporate espionage. Now, because it's espionage, which is secret by nature, it's difficult to say how much of this actually goes on. And I'm not going to tell you stories about the things that I've heard because I don't know how much of that is truth and how much of that is fiction. But there is often stories, and I think there's some truth to these, about how one corporation will send in their engineers to another corporation and get them hired as janitors, night janitors, and they'll go through the trash at night, you know, with a wastebasket of the CEO or their leading engineers and so forth, and steal information or learn whatever they can about that corporation. Well, that's the kind of thing that could happen. Or if you are an ethical hacker, you can do that as an ethical hacker, but you can also, through the network somehow, try to gain access into the corporation and see if you can steal any information. Now, this is not likely to be something that we're going to do. If you're hired by Company A, they're not going to hire you legitimately to go to Company B and steal their information. That would just be illegal. I don't care what kind of contract you have in your hand. But they can hire you to see if you could pose as a hacker from Company B and to hack into Company A's network. In this nugget, we talked about different kinds of hacking terms. For example, what are the different kinds of hacker types out there that are available? Makes it sound like you can order your own hacker. I'll take the short one with the greasy hair and the pizza stain on his T-shirt. In any case, what kind of hacker types are there? There's black hat, white hat. We discussed some of those kinds. And, of course, that a certified ethical hacker is typically a white hat or perhaps a gray hat. And then we also talked about security weaknesses. Remember, a vulnerability has not yet been proven, really, until there's actually an exploit that's out there. And the first person that comes up with that would be the person that came up with the O-Day or 0-Day. We also looked at external threats. How can you get into the network? And there's just a few examples that I gave you. There's a lot of different ways, but some common ways I gave you there, such as through the Internet. And then we also looked at internal threats, such as what ignorant employees can do unknowingly, or what malicious employees can do, or careless administrators. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.